This is Figures Sold Separately, episode 198, Cobra Kai Never Died, May 21st, 2018.
Remember what Miyagi said.
Karate come from heart.
I will show no mercy.
Discover the secrets of karate with Karate Kid Tri-Action figures.
Concentrate, Daniel-san.
They chop, twist, and kick. The Karate Kid and Johnny are each sold separately. And for more action, look for the Karate Kid Competition Center from Remco.
DuckTales is back, finally.
Finally! We've been waiting and waiting and waiting.
For the adventures of Webigail.
Oh my gosh,
You're just
she's
like
my
Webby.
hero. She's my hero.
She's wonderful.
Yes.
And Kate Micucci is fantastic.
Oh my gosh, she's so talented.
Yeah.
I know.
We have been watching DuckTales, where we've got the 3 episodes since they came back from break.
Yeah.
They've been hard at work making more, and for me and Car2, it's kind of an interesting experience because I was part of the original DuckTales generation.
Yeah.
When I was a kid, and this is kind of your first time.
I never watched DuckTales growing up, ever.
It was around, though, right? Because you were born in 88, so...
I was born in 88.
In
I don't know. We didn't really,
You were 4 or 5, so maybe a little on the young end for...
Yeah, and we didn't really watch, TV.
Yeah.
We didn't watch Sesame Street.
Oh, my gosh. How did you learn anything? What about Mr. Rogers' Neighborhood?
Books, Ken. Somehow Mr. Rogers' Neighborhood, we did watch that.
Okay.
I think my mom had read this study that
I don't think you can be a functional person without Mr. Rogers' Neighborhood.
I don't think you can either, thank God.
I hope they still run that, even though it's
Oh, they should. They absolutely should. Yeah, my mom read this study when we were little that watching Sesame Street gives you ADD, and so none of us were allowed to watch it. Funny thing, though, we all have ADD anyway, including both my parents.
Because it would cut away to a 30-second segment and then cut back
they said the segments were too small. It would make kids not have the ability to sit still for more than 30 seconds.
So now we grow up and watch Family Guy and Robot Chicken and things that are deliberately cut up into up into 1 and 2 minute.
Except that, marathoning big movies is also my favorite thing. Lord of the Rings, the extended editions.
But when you marathon big movies, I know this about you because I do the same thing. You don't sit down and watch a 4-hour movie.
That's not true.
Oh, you do?
Yeah, I totally do.
Because typically, I'll see you watch half an hour of something and then pause it and then go away for several hours and then come back to it.
Well, I do that too, but it kind of just depends on my day. If I've got a 4-hour chunk and it's the weekend, hell yeah, I'll watch the whole thing.
So you didn't have, you weren't part of the DuckTales thing.
No, I missed out
was
on
a thing. DuckTales, now the old Carl Barks comic books were from our grandparents' generation with Scrooge McDuck, and they hold up. I've not read a whole lot of them, but by all accounts, they are really sophisticated for Disney comic books. And DuckTales was sort of loosely based on this idea, and it was a phenomenon at the time because there weren't a whole lot of cartoons that just kind of everybody watched that were just kind of ubiquitous in that way. But DuckTales was huge, and it was on for a long time. And and if I'd done my research before this episode, I'd be able to spit out this is how long it was on.
I'm surprised you don't just know that anyway.
I know I'm slipping.
You are slipping,
but the most recent episodes that we've watched involved things like Gizmo Duck, who is from the original show, and Gyro Gearloose, who is Scrooge McDuck's inventor, and all of the things that you're seeing for the first time in this iteration were have their roots in this other show. And we've done that kind of thing before with like Star Trek: The Next Generation and stuff like that, where for you, where these are shows that you didn't really grow up with, like a lot of people did, but there are, the way this reboot is done is it's very intentionally bringing in things that are going to mean a lot to the old audience, but it's still written as its own self-contained thing. Like they really don't nod and wink to the camera, like, you know, remember that from when you were a kid, because it's not like some of the other things that are specifically fan service for like cult followings. Right.
Like we didn't have to do any preparation to be able to just dive right into the show. We just started watching it.
Right. Exactly. But one of the first pieces of actual fan service that I did notice in one of the last episodes that we watched was Darkwing Duck. The terror, I am the terror that flaps in the night.
Yeah.
Darkwing Duck and I had to like pause the show and let you know what that was a reference to, because that was part of the Disney afternoon. There was DuckTales and Tailspin, which was based on the Jungle Book characters of all things. But it was like Shere Khan and Baloo and King Louie, and they ran like a shipping company out of it was very...
What?
It's very strange.
That sounds like you're describing a dream that you had.
It doesn't really, like... It doesn't translate exceptionally well.
How high were they when they thought of that show?
It really felt like they were trying to figure out something to do with Disney characters, and they were really just scraping the bottom of the barrel. Because the Disney afternoon, and I'm doing this off the top of my head, but I believe the Disney afternoon, there's 5 shows I can think of. DuckTales, Chip and Dale's Rescue Rangers.
Okay.
Which, by the way, theme song every bit as cool as DuckTales.
Sweet, we'll have to check that one out.
Darkwing Duck, Tailspin.
About the shipping company.
Yeah. And I'm forgetting one, but there's another one in there somewhere. But they were very 90s-esque reimaginings of some of these older properties. Like Chip and Dale were older characters, and they were sort of updated and reimagined in this new show. Same with the Jungle Book characters. Same with the characters in DuckTales. This new one, it's kind of like, 30 years later, they bring back this concept, but they're sort of reimagining a lot of it from the ground up.
Yeah,
so there's not a whole lot they have to adhere to.
Yeah, it's all very modern. Like, in it, you can see, like, nods to, like, Apple and the race between, like, Apple and Microsoft about different, and Google, and like,
right.
Like it's very much like there are very modern tropes in there that would not have existed in the earlier incarnations of it.
And the most obvious 2 changes, in my opinion, in this new one are that Webby is an actual character, where in the original DuckTales, she was sort of the meek girl character that she's the antithesis of what this character is in this show. She's sort of the meek character that was like always sort of hiding behind the skirts of her, and Huey, Dewey, and Louie were like the adventurous ones.
Did they have unique personalities, though, or were they just the adventurous ones?
No, Huey, Dewey, and Louie, before this iteration of this show, in every incarnation of those characters up to this point, were completely interchangeable.
Yeah.
But they all had qualities of the 3 characters that we see in this version of DuckTales, but they're... it's almost like they took the one personality and split it into 3.
Yeah, so you've got the one who's like obsessed with making money all the time,
right.
The one who is always working on getting his badges,
right,
and then what's the third? What's his like shtick? The third one, I can't recall.
Adventure.
Oh, that's right.
One that's just into like adventure all the time.
Let's just go find danger.
Right.
Exactly.
And so that's kind of and that's been one of the best parts of the show, that they made that move, and it was a big change.
Yeah.
But getting back to Darkwing Duck, that was a legitimate show, and what I think is really cool about the way it's presented on DuckTales is that, at least at this stage, Darkwing Duck is a TV show in the universe of DuckTales. Mm-hmm. Which is kind of a clever way to do that, to integrate that character. And even if they never mention it again, it's a neat nod to the old fans without really leaving anybody behind.
Yeah, agreed.
So, but we're enjoying it. And I think this episode is going to be all about throwbacks and fan service, because the rest of it is going to be about another franchise that you had never seen because you grew up not watching stuff.
Yeah, I know. I'm really glad to be going back through and getting to know all of these, all of these different fandoms and great pop culture, shows and movies and all these things. Yeah. I really want to be educated. I don't want to be like my sister, who thought that Ernie was a girl until she was in middle school.
Really?
Yeah, she thought Bert and Ernie were married or something.
Well, they're not married.
Well, yeah, but she didn't quite get that either.
They have separate beds, though, so.
Yeah, but so did Lucy and Desi.
Did they?
Yeah.
Yeah.
They did.
I know I know that the Brady Bunch, mom and dad, had separate beds.
Yep. I think in that time on television, they always had separate beds. That was kind of what
in
was
the Brady
accepted.
Bunch, though, it makes sense, because when you already have 6 children in the house, you don't want any more. You start sleeping in separate beds just to make sure that neither one of you has any more children.
I guess. Didn't they have other forms of contraception at that point?
No.
Oh, okay. Well.
No.
Here's to pop culture education.
They had the kinds of clothes that you wore in the 70s. That was their contraception.
Oh, that's terrible. They had some really cute things back then.
Like a butterfly collar.
God, I love a butterfly collar.
Well, this is Figures Sold Separately, and we are, for the second week in a row, sans Matt, but that's okay. He is, it's his mom's birthday, and he is in Charlotte visiting his mother. And
happy birthday, Matt's mom.
Happy birthday, Matt's mom. And so we gave him the week off, and he's going to be back next week. And I am extremely excited to hear what he's going to have to say about Far Cry 5, which, because you can see on your Xbox what your friends are doing all the time, I know that he has been playing Far Cry 5 pretty much to the exclusion of sleeping. So I think there's going to be a lot to go over where Far Cry 5 is concerned.
Definitely plan for a mega brain break next week.
Yes, that's going to be a good time. And I have some things I've been...
well, don't spoil it.
I won't spoil it.
Okay.
Yeah, I will.
No.
I think I've already mentioned it. I've been playing through the Assassin's Creed series from the beginning, because I only made it halfway through Revelations, which is the 4th game in the series. And there's 10 games in the series now, and I'm a little bit past the point where I stopped. So I'm now in new territory, and that feels good. And then from here, I'm just gonna keep trucking along in the series, and all the way up until I get to the last one. So I'll keep everybody posted. But I'm Ken at MultiverseAVL on Twitter, and we as a podcast are at FSS Podcast on Twitter, and you can tweet at us there. And this is...
I'm Car2D2. You can find me at car2.d2 on the Instagrams.
Cool. So, and subscribe and tell your friends, and shout outs to all of you that listen to us on a regular basis. Go like us up on your platform of choice, iTunes or Spreaker or Spotify or wherever you find us, and write us a quick review. We would really appreciate it. Tell everybody why you enjoy the show, and it really helps us out. we have a new website that is going to be, well, it's a website that's been out before, but it's been defunct for a little while, and it's getting updated. So we will have a new website here in the next few weeks. Really excited about that. Been working on that pretty hard. And getting into the meat of things, you have been...
Yeah, watching
for the first time.
Ever. I am 30 years old, and I have just watched Karate Kid.
Yeah, the Karate Kid.
Oh, it's the? There's a the at the
There's
beginning?
a the, yeah.
Okay, sorry. I am 30 years old, and I have just watched The Karate Kid.
The Karate Kid. The original with Ralph Macchio.
Yes.
And Billy Zabka. And you watched part 1, part 2, and about half of part 3.
Yeah.
Which is fine. And the fourth one is also fine.
Yeah, well...
I mean, it's good for pretty much Pat Morita being Miyagi, which is fantastic. But there are some of these benchmark films of the early 80s that I think are the touchstones for my generation. Mm-hmm. Things like The Dark Crystal, Labyrinth, The Karate Kid, Back to the Future, Ghostbusters, certainly Star Wars, but if you hadn't seen Star Wars, you wouldn't be on this show.
Yeah, Star Wars is the only one that I grew up with. Every other one of those I discovered
you've had to catch up
much
on
later. Yeah.
And Ghostbusters, I think we've talked before on the show, some of these movies are things that for certain audiences they can kind of catch on now and it's fine, but I've even noticed the original Star Wars trilogy is very difficult for somebody to get into in their 20s, just catching on to it now. And I think it's just because everything has become so ubiquitous. Star Wars informed so much of the movies that we watch now that going back and seeing even the thing that informed it doesn't always come across as impressive as it does when you have the weight of a nostalgia with it.
Yeah.
You weren't a huge fan of the original Ghostbusters.
Yeah, not a huge fan.
Which is amazing to me because that was one of my seminal movies growing up, as was The Karate Kid, which as we were rewatching it makes me realize how standards have changed in what comprises a kids movie. Because Ghostbusters and The Karate Kid both have a pretty good amount of adult content. They have a lot of swearing and stuff of that nature, which I never even registered when I was younger. But Ghostbusters in particular is it's not a children's movie.
Yeah.
But then they turned it into a cartoon and an action figure line. And
well, of course they did.
Yeah. And you never saw Ghostbusters 2.
No.
But you did see the reboot, and you liked the reboot a lot better, but there's no accounting for that.
Well, that's true.
It was fine.
That's true.
But The Karate Kid was one of those movies that I would watch when I was 3 or 4 years old, in a karate gi. I would go get dressed up and sit and watch that movie. And
see, that was Riverdance for us.
Oh, wow. You had a costume for Riverdance?
Oh my god, you had to have multiple costumes for Riverdance. Hello.
You had costume changes for the viewing of Riverdance.
Definitely.
Wow.
Yeah, because you have all the different numbers. I always got to be the Spanish girl. She had to have a different costume from when I was one of the Russian girls. And then there's the finale where she comes out in the white dress. So, there were multiple costume changes.
Well, really the impetus for us watching The Karate Kid, of course, as you've probably guessed, if you're a fan of our show, is that Cobra Kai came out on YouTube Red, and I marathoned it in about 2 days. And there's 10 episodes. They're about half an hour apiece. And it was dynamite. It has a 100% on Rotten Tomatoes. Mm-hmm. And I watched it all the way through, and I thought you'd really enjoy it but then we kind of discovered, like, oh wait, you haven't seen the show that, like, this is it's not a reboot, it's a sequel to.
Yeah.
So what we wanted to do was I wanted to watch it again, like, as soon as I finished it, but I wanted to be sure that you had seen the Karate Kid, well, as much as a sort of essential viewing of the original
good
franchise.
Karate Kid movies. I loved the first one, and I loved the second one, and I fucking hated the third one.
Well, the third one is, it's special. The third one is special.
That's one way to put it.
The third one has some interesting villain acting. I mean, I will give it this. The third one is full of people thoroughly enjoying making this movie.
Yeah, and I think if I had grown up with it, I might have enjoyed it, but, like, the nuance, I think the thing that really sold me on the first two is, and we talked about this a little bit, but that there was so much nuance in both the protagonist and the antagonist. So the antagonist, you could actually really you could kind of, like, see their arc. They actually had a story arc. You could sympathize with them.
Right.
And then for Daniel, he's not a perfect kid, and that makes for a really
he's
interesting...
kind of a jackass.
Yeah, he's like, a 17-year-old boy. So,
kind of a brat.
Exactly. And he's kind of, he's impatient with Mr. Miyagi, but he also really loves him, but he's also 17 and grown up in, New Jersey. And so there's a bit of culture shock there. And, but
right.
he's never had the, like a father figure since he's been older. So there were just all of these really cool interpersonal dynamics that was really fascinating to watch, and it was acted well, it was written well. There were parts that were kind of what's the word I'm looking for, where something is like played up. We're recording this a little bit late at night. Exaggerated. There were some things that were exaggerated, but those things were humorous. They moved the story along. And then the first one was really focusing on Daniel, and we really got to understand his character. And then in the second one, we really got to understand a lot more of Miyagi's backstory.
Right.
And kind of understand more about his culture. And so it really kind of took the whole story and really kind of put this really great context around it.
Right.
And all of these different subtleties and honor, and what does honor mean for different cultures. And
well, and you and I had talked about, one of the interesting observations was that in the first part, in the original Karate Kid, you have a character, Johnny Lawrence, who is arguably just like a kid that's also just like this 17, 18-year-old kid who is under the influence of this really sort of corrupting person. And then in the in part two, there's Miyagi's rival, Sato, who is a redeemable character, and his nephew is Daniel's rival in the picture. And in this situation, it's reversed, where the younger man is the one who's just an asshole. Yeah,
and has no, like, redeeming story arc,
right,
like the teacher in the first one.
So I think it'll be interesting to see what, now that you're kind of caught up, to see what you think of Cobra Kai.
Yeah.
And what we're going to do is cut this episode. Pause it. We're going to watch the first episode of Cobra Kai, and we'll come back for a little bit on the back end here and discuss it. And I really kind of want to get your thoughts. We're going to keep it pretty spoiler free, but if you haven't seen the first episode of Cobra Kai, pause the episode, go watch it. The first episode, I think, even if you don't have YouTube Red, I think the first episode is free. So go check it out and come back, and we're going to discuss it. It's probably a good place to stop, though, if you haven't seen it. So we will see you here shortly.
We'll be back. After these messages, we'll be right back.
Oh, wow, that's like the ABC.
Yeah.
Wow, you did watch some cartoons.
I did watch a few cartoons.
All right, we'll be back.
really good.
So episode 1 down,
Yeah,
nine to go.
down. Yep, 9 to go.
So that's the first episode of Cobra Kai. We catch back up 34 years later with Johnny and Daniel and kind of where things are going, and it's what are some of your initial thoughts?
It reminded me a lot of the first movie. Like, it's real. I know they got the same actors to play the same characters grown up, but it really was like they just like stuck them in a time machine and was like, okay, now that scene that you just did, you're going to do it again as an adult, because it was spot on. Like, the characters were so good.
Yeah,
it was really awesome. And it has like. I was really hoping that all characters would be sympathetic and not perfect, and yeah, everybody has like their foibles. And
I thought it was interesting how in like 20 minutes you feel like you have genuine sympathy for Johnny.
Yeah,
like
genuine
all
sympathy.
The things, like,
yeah, and you're like, oh, Daniel, you're still kind of a punk.
Well, and I think it's interesting that this concept of like Johnny is one of those kids that really did like peak at 17.
Yeah,
and like that moment that like represents a big victory for Daniel was like the moment where Johnny's life just completely turned to shit.
Yeah,
and like he's been like, to catch up with him 30 years later and to be like he never really came back from that. Mm-hmm. To be like his life has just been on like a steady decline ever since.
Yeah,
is really kind of like interesting to think of.
Well, and I like the switch up. Like, I really like that LaRusso is not, like, he's not a sensei teaching at a dojo right now. Like, you can tell that the experience in his youth obviously changed him and made a huge impact on his character, his generosity, like, all of that stuff. For all of his foibles, he shows immediately that, like, he has taken the lessons that he learned from Miyagi, and yeah, he's moved on to other things, but you can tell that it's made a difference in his life. But I like that, like, he didn't grow up to run a dojo, you know? Because how many of us have these amazing experiences in high school that are really formative, and sometimes we think, oh my gosh, this is what I'm gonna, like, do for the rest of my life. I want to, you know, fill in the blank. But it doesn't always end up that way. But those experiences, especially in high school, can be so formative that you will always see those ripples. Mm-hmm. So I really, like, the story was just really believable. Yeah, I really enjoyed it, and I'm looking forward to the next ones.
I think it's an interesting juxtaposition to have somebody like Johnny who's sort of like the anti-Miyagi.
Yeah.
You know, where we see him now taking on a student where he's kind of like instead of, like when the kid asks him to teach him, instead of him being like Miyagi, where it's like, well, I'm not going to teach you because, you know, it's not about that. It's about defending honor. He's just kind of like, if you quit being such a pussy, maybe you'll stop getting your ass kicked. Like, if you'll stop getting your ass kicked,
you know? Stop being annoying.
Yeah. And this idea of like Johnny recognizing that he has a gift, which is not something that you usually get, but that he's kind of reopening the dojo that he was part of, and we're seeing that as a triumphant moment, which it's surprising considering what we saw that dojo represent in both the first and the third installment of the original, you know, trilogy of movies, that to see that as like a redemptive type of space is really unusual. But to cast it up against sort of this generation, and, you know, there being like a lack of real discipline in that. So knowing now that you've seen the first episode, where do you want it to go from here? Like, what are some of the things that you want to see in the next 9 episodes? And beyond, because it was renewed for a second. This is one of those shows that was renewed for a second season within like a day of it coming out.
Man, way to go, YouTube Red production company. That's awesome. I want to see, first of all, who LaRusso ends up with. We've seen him with so many different women over the years. It'll be nice to find out who he actually
really
got
only
with.
two. I mean, he really only had 2 love interests.
Yeah, but he had that third love interest at least halfway through the third movie.
But she wasn't a love interest. She told him pretty much right away that she had a boyfriend, and they
I never finished the movie, so they could get together for all I know.
Yeah. Well, it's kind of interesting. She kind of disappears about halfway through the movie.
Does she really?
Yeah, she moves back home.
Oh my god.
With her boyfriend. Which she was written originally. That's a piece of trivia about that third movie. She was written originally as a love interest, but Ralph Macchio was married at the time, and he didn't want his wife to be jealous.
Oh my god,
so he
that's
had
so sweet.
So he had them rewrite her as a platonic interest, which is why suddenly she just takes that left turn in her second scene where she's just like, I have a boyfriend. I need to tell you I have a boyfriend. So this is not a love interest.
That's hilarious.
And then they hang out as friends the rest of the...
That's hilarious.
Yeah.
I was glad to see that Ralph Macchio had aged. He actually looks more like the age he's playing right now, which he still looked 17 even when he was 28 in the third one. So that was, but I'm looking forward to seeing.
He okay, you say he's aged, but kinda. I mean, you're right. He does look closer to the age he's playing, but the first movies were made over the period of almost a decade. So
and he played so much younger than he actually was. He's playing an 18-year-old in the... Right. He's playing 10 years younger than he actually is.
Right, and he has aged, but he doesn't look 56 years old.
Oh my god, he's 56?
Ralph Macchio is 56.
Wow, damn, son, nice.
But the character is probably more mid-40s.
See, yeah, okay, he plays that. I can see that. So,
and Johnny about the same.
Yeah. Johnny, actually, I think Johnny has aged. I think he's a little more attractive. But he's got that grizzled look that I kind of dig.
He's actually quite a bit younger. He's 52.
Oh, okay.
So he's a few years younger than, which is especially interesting when you consider how much younger Ralph Macchio looked in the first Karate Kid compared to Billy Zabka. But,
seriously.
He's
I'm excited to see more play out in the relationship between these two men, because if I remember correctly, at the end of the first Karate Kid, Johnny actually brings him the trophy and hands it to him in kind of this apologetic manner.
Right.
And yet, as Johnny's having flashbacks when he's standing at the sports center, it's obvious that whole evening was pretty traumatic, both for the what that loss meant to his ego, but then also the interaction with his teacher becoming so violent in the parking lot.
Yeah.
So I'm curious. They've kind of set the stage that he is legitimately struggling with moving on from that point in his life. And yet, right when that moment happened, he was definitely kind of turning away from the teachings that had been drilled into him.
Well, we found out in the third movie that all of the students had left.
Yeah, exactly.
All the students had quit.
Yeah. So I'm excited to see kind of more how that plays out, and how, they obviously both have places to go. You can see kind of clearly that there are both spaces where they could potentially move into as far as their character development, the relationship dynamic between the two of them. They've got all of these kind of contradictory things when they meet up again. LaRusso's kind of an asked to him, but in kind of like a not very self-aware way.
Right.
So I'm really excited to see kind
It's
of
like very self-righteous.
Yeah, very self-righteous,
Yeah.
but he also like legitimately, doesn't want this guy to like, feel bad. And so I'm excited to see where they develop. I feel like they've kind of set it up really well, both as far as the story of this dojo developing and how this new culture, how he's going to create it or rather carry it on, the relationship between him and his new student. So there's a lot of different places that they could go. We met LaRusso's daughter, and we know that she maybe has some questionable friendships, so there's all these different things that they can kind of explore. So cool. I'm looking forward to it.
Well, we'll check back in and like do a few more segments like this as we go through the series. I'm trying really hard not to tip my hand since I have seen the whole thing at this point.
Oh, that's right.
I've seen the whole first season, but we'll be watching it again together. But I think that'll wrap it up for now. Matt will be back next week, as we mentioned. We'll do a brain break and check in a little bit more with Cobra Kai and how that's going. And we will see all of you guys then. Did you have anything else?
No, I'm good.
Cool.
Sweet.
All right. Well, same time, same place. We'll see you guys next week.
Bye.